Crystal Morris here from Crystalline Connections. I'm here this morning to have a chat with you about what holistic counselling is. So as a holistic counsellor myself, this is a question that I do get asked pretty often because they're not super common. So yeah, I'd like to share that with you. So to start with, I suppose if we just break down the words, holistic and counselling. So holistic means to be concerned with the whole of something rather than the analysis or separation into parts. So looking at everything, all of the parts together, how they are interdependent on each other and interrelate and create this whole something. In counselling, that something is you. And then counselling is to then provide guidance or direction towards a resolution of a personal problem, essentially, and based on a therapeutic relationship with another that is doing the counselling, which is me. Yes, so what does that actually mean, and what does that show up in terms of differences with other people that might be helping you with your mental health? So if we look at psychologists, for example, so those who are trained in psychology only, and I don't want to put just a broad umbrella over everybody who's a psychologist. Everybody operates differently, but if we just look at psychology on its own as a training, essentially it is focused on the science that deals with the mental processes of your behavior in your brain. So it's very mind focused, and how does your brain then drive your emotions and your thought processes and your behaviors, which may then show up as mental health conditions, I suppose. And so that being said, there is it sounds like psychology is very focused on a part of the self being your brain, which is very helpful because we do need to understand how the brain works, and being able to diagnose a condition can be helpful to understand what a list of symptoms and characteristics might be in common with other people that experience the same, and that's pretty much what a diagnosis is, right? A list of symptoms, here's a label for them. And so what I've personally found and experienced, and have also had many of my clients also reflect back to me, is that when only dealing strictly in psychology, there doesn't seem to be any consideration for anything outside of that list or those processes of the brain, essentially. So so I guess take a list of symptoms, give it a name, and then they sort of already have a standard procedure for, okay, now how do we deal with said condition of, I don't know, bipolar or anxiety or schizophrenia, that kind of thing. And then they take that process and match it with the diagnosis, and then that's how you're treated. There's no personal element, I suppose, or any kind of humanistic approach to who you are on a bigger scale as a whole, to really understand why you're experiencing the symptoms that you're experiencing. And then psychiatrists, of course, very similar to a psychologist, just they've been trained to the same level as like a medical doctor, and therefore have the ability to prescribe medication. And often, again, it seems to be very narrow and very focused on the medication and what what meds are going to help your symptoms, basically, not so much who you are, why you have them, and how we can deal with any root causes. So I just want to clarify, by no means am I saying that psychologists or psychiatrists or counselors that aren't holistic counselors are not useful or anything like that, because I 100% believe they are, and they definitely have their place in a holistic approach to mental health, because their professions are very focused in one area, that they have a lot of information that's very helpful to know. So in terms of working holistically, though, it's not taking in everything of a person. And so I suppose if you wanted to work with your mental health holistically, then working with a psychologist to really understand how your brain's functioning and what might be driving your behaviors from a mental perspective is helpful to know. If you were to work with a psychiatrist, if your symptoms were debilitating or really consuming to a point that you are not able to engage in therapy because you're so overwhelmed by your symptoms, then sure, medication can also be very beneficial in times of need to at least level out to be able to take in anything else. So you could work with a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and then you could also work with a holistic counsellor to be starting to fill in the gaps of what I feel is being missed in those areas, and what holistic counselling sort of is aimed at supporting. So in saying that, what are those gaps? So things that I focus on. So I guess we always take a very detailed history of someone and how they grew up, and systemically as well, what happened in your family system, and what traumas were not resolved in ancestors, and what conditions might have been there, or things, sort of touching into family constellations there of what can be passed down, and then also taking into consideration all the needs that may not have been met as a child, of course any abuse or neglect and things like that. And so, an attachment theory as well. So, where do we sit in the world of an attachment style? What's our predominant go-to? And that's all built off how we connect with our caregivers in those first couple of years, and what their capacity was to give to us and hold us, and how that goes on to show up for the rest of your life. If it's not recognized or intervened, then those characteristics will play out. That's a whole other subject. So attachment styles, beliefs work as well. Beliefs are, and I suppose in psychology, there's the CBT approach of, taking a behavior or a thought process and replacing it with something that's more positive and more productive to your life, which can work, definitely. It can also not work at all. So the belief work that I do is based on the work of Byron Katie, which is a more inquisitive, curious approach to noticing what your beliefs are, what your attachments are, and questioning if they're true. That's a really good start. And starting to see that it's possible for multiple truths to exist at once, and that while we might have a belief and attachment to this thing over here, the opposite can actually exist at the same time. And what this lets us do is zoom out and be able to take in reality as it is, and find acceptance in reality instead of arguing with it. And then we're able to move forward in a way that is less emotionally charged and attached to these beliefs, and so it kind of opens up a bit of space in us so we can make different decisions on our behaviour, or what we do and don't want or expect from others. So beliefs is definitely something that we cover off, and the body. The body is like one of my favourites, so working somatically, and the nervous system, so using polyvagal theory, working with the vagus nerve and our different states that we have, so our fight and flight and our freeze, and our ventral vagal, our social engagement system as well. So a lot of that is somatic, feeling into the body, being in your body. It's actually mind-blowing how many people are actually cut off here, and unfortunately I feel, my personal experience and others that have shared with me, is that psychology kind of continues to support that disconnection between our mind and our body, as opposed to bringing them together. And so many illnesses and diseases and stuff can manifest in our body, and pain as a result of trauma and mental health issues as well. I mean, it makes sense. The brain's not just a standalone thing on its own doing things, like it's all connected. And so working with the body is, I feel, very important, and what we can release from there, and what wisdom we can find out when we connect with those parts of ourselves is amazing, and quite empowering as well. So we start to find a sense of being able to look after self, and being able to hold the self and be your own container, because I do feel that with some other therapies we can get overly reliant on the therapist as such, and this expectation that they're the professional and they're the expert and they're gonna fix us, right? They've got all the answers, but the problem is that they don't. That's not their job. They're often there to reflect back to you and to give you some names of things that are considered to be happening with your brain, but there's not a lot of empowerment going on of how do you become okay with you, and how do you take that out into the world, and how do you shift things on a more systemic, foundational place as well. So I do feel like that's what holistic counselling is focusing on. There is actually making permanent change when we can dig deep and find those root causes, and find those, and to be honest, I don't feel like there's any one root cause of anyone's problems. There's always a combination of all these things that somebody has experienced throughout their lives and their ancestors' lives, that comes together to create this person, hence the back to the holistic part again. Yes, and what else did I want to mention? Yes, so parts work was the other thing I really wanted to touch on. Pardon me. So I know that I've just talked about everything being the whole, and that means to not separate into parts, but when we can work with different parts of the self and bring them together to work together and have a harmonious relationship, and to accept and love and bring in all parts of us, so there's no suppressing, dismissing, shaming, all of that kind of thing. That is a separation of self. We're bringing it in. And so while we might focus on, like, I don't know, this part over here that might be really insecure, then we might also work with the part of you that feels really confident in some settings, and how can they work together. So it starts to create this holistic end game, I suppose, because the more parts of yourself that you can bring in and love, the more fuller we feel, and the more supported we feel as well, because it's no longer I am an insecure person, it is, there's a part of me that feels insecure in these scenarios, and it's a whole lot less personal as like an identification with a part. We can start to separate that, but also bring it in at the same time. So I know that sounds a little bit contradictory, but when we can love it and we can see its value and see what gifts it's actually bringing to us as well, then we don't need to fight with it anymore, and the problem itself kind of organically stops ruling our lives. And so with the parts work, we can do like the inner child work, I think is really important. So obviously working with those younger parts of ourselves. Everybody has an inner child. I don't care how great your childhood was, that little part of you is still in there. And to be able to connect with that and form a relationship with that part of yourself is ongoingly nurturing. And then the shadow work as well, so finding those parts of ourselves that we just cannot accept, that we really dislike or hate or judge in others. And also in the shadow work, we can also work with those parts of ourselves where we find envy or awe or really idolizing another person, like a trait in another person. So that can also be our shadow work, to understand that that can also be a part of us. Yes, so that's parts work. And then also within the holistic counselling framework, and I think this area I'm about to talk about can differ, I suppose, depending on who you've trained with and what their delivery of holistic counselling was. And I've probably brought more of this in than anything else. So I'm talking about a metaphysical area or a spiritual approach as well. And so understanding, we're going to do dabbling in quantum physics here, and energy, and understanding that we're all made of energy, and dipping into things like the law of attraction and intention and something bigger than self, whether that be God or source or universe or whatever you can connect to, but understanding something bigger than self that you're actually innately a part of. So working with elements like the soul, and the soul may mean many different things for many people. For me, the soul is the essence of who we are. It is that untouched part, untouched from this world, and it's here to express itself in a human way. But essentially it's the essence of you. And I'm tapping on my heart because I feel like this is where my soul is, and that this body is its vessel to live through, to be experienced and expressed through. So we also bring in those elements as well. And so I think to wrap it up in, where am I at, 20 minutes, that's probably plenty to take in. And I guess my passion and my goal is really to be bridging the gaps that I feel are there, that I've experienced, that I've witnessed other people experience between psychology and science and the sort of more mainstream medical system, and bridging that into spirituality and more alternative therapies and a more holistic approach of taking in a whole person as an individual, as opposed to just parts of them. So that's what I aim to do. So I think that's all I'm going to share for today. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments or reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to have a chat. Yeah, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.